Welcome to another edition of Stand Alone, where we go from being ordinary to extraordinary. And what we're really talking about is just taking leadership of ourselves, our lives, so then we can lead other people. We don't want to be leading people until we are, make that commitment to be a forever student, and then constantly be improving ourselves. So today we have a special guest. We have Ryan Munsey. So he is a number 1 bestseller of a book. I'm in a fast, Ryan, and I'm failing so miserably because one of my things that I gave up was cursing because I don't curse in general, but in business, I am just a disaster with my mouth. So, I'm going to just say F your feelings, and everyone knows what that is.
Mhm.
And you are more than welcome to curse if that's what you do. We don't want to get offended. We want to get inspired in life. But it's just something I wanted to challenge myself with as I'm in this fast. And so for me, this is an incredibly important piece of work because really what we're doing is just mastering ourselves. And you go through in great detail throughout your book, give lots of examples and places where people can do further research. And I think that's what's important for us to just dissect this. You have a background actually in nutrition, which
Mhm.
I love because I think what's important for people to understand is all these things are deeply connected. Information is intelligence, and some of us are just not with it because our diet is so bad. So we'll tie that in all together too, because I don't think you can be optimal if your health isn't there also. But I wanted to ask you, how did you get started in really going into these deep dives of how to get better? Like, what inspired you to gain control of yourself? Why do you seek that constant mastery?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I grew up playing sports, and when people always ask the question of what did you want to be when you grew up, right? And as a little kid, I wanted to be a professional athlete. Wanted to play basketball or baseball professionally, and that's 10 years old, 12 years old. By the time I was in high school, I realized I wasn't going to be good enough to play Division 1, much less go pro, and um, I chose to go to school, not for sports, but for academics. And I went to a big time Division 1 program, and my best friend from high school was actually a year behind me. He got a track scholarship there, and I was able to hang out with him, and I saw firsthand what real high performance looked like. I'm talking football players that played in the NFL, guys who sprinted for Team USA in the Olympics, and I'm arm's length away from them, learning how to train, the same way they are, and seeing them at arm's length. Like I said, that was the first time I realized what elite level performance looked like. And I also had a very clear understanding of the gap between where I was and what that is. And since I was no longer playing sports, I just filled that competitive void with training and learning everything I could about high performance, and got into bodybuilding, changed majors, and got my degree in food science and human nutrition, and just became fascinated by the way that we could and can control certain inputs to get the outputs that we're after. You change the way you train, you change the way you eat, you change the way you read and think, and you can change the way you look, feel, perform, all of that stuff. And that was the beginning of it for me. And the more I saw benefit and saw results, the more it's kind of a self-perpetuating cycle. It kind of draws you in, and you want to put more into it. You get more out, and you just kind of keep going down that rabbit hole. And 20 years later, here we are.
Yeah, wow. So, here, if you hear this, especially for the audience, because we live in a world today where I don't want to say today, I think it's always been this case. It might just be getting it feels more strong to me in my business. I've noticed a shift in people where they're internalizing a lot of a lot of things. They're calling things that are a struggle that are not struggles. Like if we called these things a struggle, 20 years ago, people would probably laugh at us. And so, when we talk about mindset and we talk about just communication, this is really, really important. And for people that you open up your book and you talk about struggle, toil, the stagnation and the frustration that people feel, and then getting people to move to a place of how can I be invincible? How can I have a high level of certainty in my performance? And so you start off by going through the SEAL Fit training that you did. I've interviewed Mark Devine. He's just a phenomenal human being.
Mhm.
And I've had the pleasure and honor of knowing a lot of, I don't want to say the greatest Navy SEALs, but to me, they're the greatest because I've worked with them personally. But they're all pretty great people, great human beings. What did that do for you when you did that
Yeah.
training where you pushed yourself to that level of discomfort? Which today, Ryan, what I just feel from people is they're just looking for the easiest path. They're looking for the most comfortable thing. And I'm like, you're just cementing your ordinariness, like how easy you are to be replaced. And I don't mean to say this in a demeaning way, but you've got to put some stress onto yourself to get yourself to a higher level.
There's so much in what you just said. I'm laughing. I love that phrase, cementing your ordinariness. And,
Yeah.
and the more ordinary you are, the more you are replaceable, right?
Yeah.
And if we want to be indispensable, irreplaceable, we've got to figure out how we can add value. How can you be so good that they can't ignore you? They meaning a team, an organization, a company, a partner, whatever it is, can't imagine life without you. And I don't think a lot of people look at opportunities through that lens, right? And so, one of the things we can do, I mean, that's a bit of reframing. And another type of reframing is, you talk about the struggle and what is labeled a struggle now. Actually, right before we hit record, I was on with Steve, and um, we were talking about his favorite show is 1883, and we're talking about what life was like 100 years ago, 150 years ago, and what everything was a struggle. You're literally fighting not to die every single day. We have air conditioning, we have heating, we have indoor plumbing, we have electricity, we have the internet. Life's pretty easy right now compared to what it was 100 years ago or 200 years ago. And so, that's another reframe where if you think you're having a bad day, just think about those things and can you be grateful for those things? And so I know this is kind of off on a tangent, but as you were talking, that concept of reframing popped into my mind. To the question of Seal Fit and Mark
Yeah.
Devine, Mark's an awesome human. I've had the opportunity to talk to him several times after going through that. That all came about because in 2012, I started my own business. I started a gym and hired a business coach, joined a mastermind. And the guy who was the coach and ran that mastermind was also Mark's business coach at that time. And when they started designing Seal Fit as a program, we were actually the first group to do like their beta version of it outside of Encinitas. And it was a small group. We had like seven, I think there were seven of us, with two of the SEAL Fit coaches. Both of those guys were retired SEALs. And um, you point out like it is a crucible event. It's a physically demanding, but also mentally demanding event. And the real value in that for me wasn't that it can fatigue you physically, right? I said right afterwards, anytime somebody asked me about it, any idiot can make you tired, right? That's not where the benefit in that event comes in. The benefit comes in the things that they teach you as you're going through it. And I talk about this in the book, but I had a moment towards the end of the day with one of the coaches, Brad McLeod, and you get to a point, and they do this by design, but you get to a point where your mind just wants to shut down and you just want to quit. Um, you know, and the body is basically revolting and shutting down and they're calling out directions and they're saying like, okay, here's our last evolution and this is what we're going to do. And there was two guys that actually were, the coaches had deemed that they were done and they were shutting them down for the day. And
Mhm.
told the, I'm not going to say their names, but he said, okay, so you're guy number one, you're over here, you're just going to go dig a hole in the sand. And guy number two, you're going to go over here and do that with him. And everybody else is going down here. And so if that's two, and then so the other four guys go this way, and I'm just kind of standing there and I'm like, my brain is not functioning, my body won't really move. And he just looks at me, he's like, Munsey, you don't have to do it. Like, it's your choice. And he literally like takes his heel, draws a line in the sand, and he's like, you can quit. You can go that way and do it. And it's their version when they go through buds. It's ring the bell, right? All you have to do is ring the bell. You get a warm blanket, you get a hot meal, and suffering's over. And so the way that you make it through buds is you don't ring the bell. And I have talked to Brad about this moment afterwards as well. And I'm grateful that he, as a coach, took the time to give me that opportunity and to lay it out in the way that I could see it as an opportunity or a choice, because I didn't want to do it. I wanted him to tell me I didn't have to. I wanted him to tell me, hey, go play in the sand. You don't have to carry rocks up and down the beach. But I wasn't going to choose to quit. And I think he knew that. And that's why when he gave me the choice, I chose, I did the final evolution. But that, we'll call it, that the mental side of it, that coaching side of it, is what makes SEAL Fit an incredible opportunity.
You bring up a great point. Do you think that they know, I don't know if it would be through data or intuition, if they can take a specific person and give them that choice because they know they're going to make the right choice? And then for the other person, do they know, no, I'm going to tell you what to do and you need to be told what to do and you're going to listen to me?
It's a great question. I think for the context of SEAL Fit, I think that's where like there's an art and a science of great
Yeah.
coaching. And I
Yep.
think knowing when to ask that question, knowing the art of being a great coach, great leader, is knowing how each person that you're leading responds, and what kind of coaching they respond to best, right? Do you need the soft gloves, kind of soft touch approach for some people, and then knowing which people you can maybe get in their face or kick them in the butt a little bit. Um, to me, that's the art of it. Now, and again, I'm referring specifically to SEAL Fit, which is, these are civilians at a thing that they've paid to participate in. Um, I've had some friends who were buds instructors, and I asked him point blank, are you trying to get people to quit when when they're at buds? And he said, no, I'm not trying to get them to quit, but what I want to know right away is, do I want to be in a foxhole with this guy? Do I
Mhm.
trust this person? And am I willing to put my life on the line and be in a foxhole with them? And I want to find out as quickly as possible what they're made of and what the answer to that question is. And I thought that was really insightful, really powerful to hear it phrased that way. And that's why Buds is as hard as it is. I also think it's one of the reasons that when many businesses and organizations try to emulate Navy SEAL culture, no matter how much they try to replicate it, they'll always fall short, because most businesses do not have the luxury of a 6-month selection process where they weed out 80% of the candidates based on character, right? So if you think about how the SEALs bring people in, you have to go through buds. It's got something like a 80% attrition rate or washout rate, depending on the numbers, give or take. That's what it is. And only after that, and only after those next steps, do they even start to talk about what your role is going to be. Like, there's no marksmanship or sniper training or breacher training at buds. All buds is who are you as a person? What's your character? Do you fit this culture? And only then do they start to look at subject matter expertise. And so think about the hiring process in the corporate world. It's not that way at all. And so that's one of the reasons that the corporate world fails in their efforts to bring, air quotes, Navy SEAL culture into their organizations.
Not even just culture, but also true and real results, because it's a lot of manipulation in business. It's just like, how can I get the numbers to reflect the outcome that I want to show, regardless of what it takes. And that mindset is it's unfortunate, in business. Um, in the book, you say something which I think people need to hear, especially in today's world where there's a lot of talk about mental health. And, in order for you to get very stabilized as an individual, there's a quote in your book that says, "The brain's failure to regulate itself is the source of all human struggle." And so, really, that's what your book is going into the weeds with. Like, what is my ability to regulate myself? And for a lot of people, um, when you don't have emotional control, and if we can break this down, so just in the most basic uh, terminology, what are emotions? Are they the same thing as feelings? Are they two separate events? And then how does that relate to our thoughts? Because a lot of people, it's just their thoughts that are taking them under. And something that's really helped me is I can turn my brain off. And I had to turn my brain off when I came into business. But I see when people get so stressed, nothing even happened to you. Like you're wild in your thinking. So, how do you explain thoughts versus emotions versus feelings?
Yeah, so that's a really important question. And I think, back to kind of the beginning of your question there, I always tell people, I set out writing this book because when I had the gym, I got tired of, frustrated with people coming in on Monday asking, what do I need to do to undo the things I did over the weekend? Um,
That's
you
why
know,
they're gym.
well, well, when I first started at the gym and with nutrition, with strength conditioning, I had an affinity for, hey, how do I write a diet or how do I write a strength conditioning program that helps you achieve your goals, whatever those things are, right? And so I equate that to, you come in, you tell me what you want. I'll write that program, write that diet. That's me rolling out the red carpet. All you have to do is walk the red carpet and you're going to get to your goal. Yet most people can't do it. Most people can't stay on the red carpet. And that fascinated me. If you're a 17-year-old kid, you come in, you tell me you want to play college football. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Or you're a 45-year-old woman and you want to lose weight and you want to set a great example for your daughter. Okay, great. Here's the plan. Time and time again, people couldn't follow the plan. And that became my obsession. Why do some people get results and other people don't? Why are most people's actions and choices not aligned with their goals and their values? And that's what led to writing this book. And that's what this book is an attempt to help people understand what they need to do in order to achieve their goals and what most common obstacles and roadblocks are. And as you pointed out, feelings, emotions, thoughts are a huge part of that. If we can't master our minds, if we can't control our choices, if we can't make choices that are aligned with our goals and our values, there's no way we're going to achieve our goals, especially the bigger goals. The bigger the goal, longer the timeline, the more of those choices you're going to have to make along the way. So more micro decisions means more opportunities to step off of that red carpet, right? So neuroscience defines feelings as mental experiences of physiological states, mental experiences of physiological states. So, physiological state is just like that's your body, like ears down. What's your status, right? And I always tell people when I'm speaking, if you don't think you can change your mental state, your feelings by altering your physiology, I'll prove to you that you can. We'll put 30 seconds on the clock. I'll tell you to do as many burpees as you can. And in 45 seconds, you're going to be in a different physiological state, and your mental experience, your feelings are going to be different than they are right now. Right. And so when we talk about decision making, it's critical that we learn how to make decisions based on goals and values, not based on our current state. Because the state that you're in right now, as you listen to this, is different than the state that you'll be in 30 minutes, in 3 hours, in 3 days. And if you're so if that is your true north, if that's your compass point for decision making, how are you ever going to be consistent in your choices? You won't be. So they have to be aligned with goals and values rather than emotional states. Um, and that's you see it time and time again in business. You see it. I mean, just watch any movie where there's a courtroom scene and the lawyer is trying to get the witness upset and get them to say something that they don't want to say, right? Like that's an emotional response. That's not a it's not a choice or an action that's aligned with that person's goals and values. You see it in sports all the time. All you have to do is get under your opponent's skin, get them off their game. The people who are the most successful in any endeavor in life are the ones who learn this skill of how to master their choices and align them with goals and values, regardless of circumstance.
Yeah, I think that's what I learned from working with the Navy SEALs for all these years. It was just what they taught me was just to be calm, like to when I would hire them, I was like, how do I get more tough? And it was always like coming back to the same lesson. It was like your toughness is a direct measure of your ability to just stay calm and not react. And then training a new default. So like, and then
Mhm.
retraining and constantly being in control of that. So when things are happening, I'm not in the mess with people. Like I'm seeing, I'm doing my best to rise above it and then to respond. It's not that you like walk away because I used to be like that too. I would just be like, F it. I don't want to have anything to do with this and just get away from everyone.
Mhm.
But that's not part of living. So just being able to respond is really important. In your book, you talk about 95% of decisions are made based on feelings. And so I think if you can just talk about that, this is very important for people to understand that like it's not that we live in a very logical world, but you're still not making decisions based on logic. And so, while you might think you're great at data analysis and that's taking control of you, it's really not. So, if you can explain that to people, I think for them to be hyper aware of that is why you need that pause, why you need that moment to then respond as opposed to react.
No, absolutely. So that's not my statistic. That comes from a cognitive neuroscientist, Antonio Damasio. And again, I always remind people, don't get hung up on the number 95.
Right.
Maybe it's 90%, maybe it's as low as 80%, right? Maybe the data isn't perfect, but it's still, even if it's as low as 80%, that's an overwhelming majority of decisions made based on an emotional state. Again, a fleeting, transient way of being. Um, and the first time I heard that, it terrified me, but it also was like a huge light bulb moment because remember, I said, the reason I kind of started writing this book was to figure out why some people are successful and others aren't. Well, that's your answer, right? The people who are not successful are the ones who are making decisions based on emotional states, whether you are triggered, whether it's an emotional reaction rather than a response. And so you kind of hit the nail on the head. And what do we do? And you can think of it as creating a wedge, any kind of a pause that gives you more space between the stimulus and the response. Um, you mentioned thoughts earlier. There's a great quote that says, "Thoughts aren't thinking." Right? Just because a thought comes into your head doesn't mean that it's a um, result of critical thinking, right? So you don't have to act on every thought you have. It's okay to have a thought, let it go, and not act on it. As a matter of fact, in most instances, we will have multiple thoughts, and I'll walk you through how this happens. So our brains, we've got a limbic system, and then we have a prefrontal cortex. And the limbic system is sort of like the devil on one shoulder, and the prefrontal cortex is the angel on the other shoulder, right? If you grew up watching cartoons. You'd always have the angel and the devil on one shoulder. So limbic system is older. It's more primitive. It's sometimes called the lizard brain. The amygdala is part of this. That's where emotional reactions happen. It is wired to be faster than the prefrontal cortex, which is where language is rooted. Um, think of that prefrontal cortex as not only the angel, but it's maybe the wise old sage. It is capable of seeing beyond the now. It's capable of complex and abstract thoughts. Limbic system, on the other hand, is incapable of seeing beyond the now. It's wired for threat detection. It can be great, right? If you and I are walking down a path in the woods and 5 feet in front of us, you're looking at me because you're talking to me. I see a snake, you don't see it yet. The first thing that I do is arm goes out. It's the stop short move, right? Um, always demonstrate this. I have people in the audience when I speak tell me what they would do, but since it's a podcast, I can't really get you to do that. But every single time I do this, people are like, yeah, this is what I do. The arm shoots out. And it's because that is a physical response. It's a physical reaction that actually occurs faster than the prefrontal cortex can formulate the words to say, Sabrina, stop, there's a snake, right? So that's an example of how the limbic system can be used for good, right? That same process where you have an immediate reaction, you're walking past the cookies at Whole Foods or the pizza, and you're like, oh my gosh, they smell good. Oh, but I gave those up for Lent. Or, oh, I'm gluten free. Oh, but I'm on a diet. The first thought will always be the first thought. That's limbic. And then the second one that is more complex is, rooted in the prefrontal cortex. That's always going to be second. And it's important to understand there's nothing wrong with you for having the first thought first. It's just your biology. That's how you're wired. But you don't have to act on it. You don't have to eat the cookie every time it smells good. You don't have to, whatever the first thought is. And again, creating a wedge, it could be breath, it could be reframing. There's tons of different tools that we can use. We've talked about a few of them already that serve as a wedge that help you increase the amount of time between stimulus and response so that then you can make a choice based on goals and values rather than a trigger.
Yeah, and also the limbic system is attached to our memories too, right? So when
Yeah,
we have grown up a certain way, this is why we react, and then we almost become our parents if we don't have that pause and be like, wait, I don't want to do that, even though it's familiar. And that's generally what we just go to a default when we're not putting thought into what we do. So just to be careful of that.
absolutely. And you said default earlier as well. And so it's really important to examine those default settings, default choices. And I mean, it's default because we haven't been intentional about identifying what we want it to be in a lot of those instances. And then, you were talking about, the SEALs teaching you, to accumulate reps of doing the thing the way you want to do it so that then that becomes the new default. And so it's important like that's something else that I teach a lot that um, the phrase muscle memory is like nails on a chalkboard to me. Um, Muscles do not have the capacity for memory. They
Okay.
don't. What we're really talking about is neurological wiring.
Yeah.
So if you would think of riding a bike or a SEAL drawing their sidearm, a golf swing, basketball player shooting a free throw, it's not muscle memory, it's neurological wiring. And so, when we do a physical movement repetitively, we're wiring those neurons to complete that motion. Habits, behavior choices are the same. They're not a physical movement, but it is still a neurologically wired process. And if you think about like a path that you can barely see in the grass or in the woods, and then the more times it is walked on, the more traffic it gets, the more it becomes a well-worn path or even like a highway. And it's the same thing with neurological wiring and processes. The first time you try to hit a tennis ball as a like from a do a tennis serve, it's awkward. And then the more times you do it, the more you wire that process, the more you train those neurons to fire in a specific um, order and pattern, the more that becomes muscle memory. Um, Now, if we changed it, if I take Tiger Woods and I put him on the range and we change his golf swing, or if I try to get you to change a habit that you've been doing for 20 years because that's how your parents did it, you're going to have to accumulate more reps doing it the new way than you did the old way in order for this new way to now become the new default. And that's another really important thing that people have to understand. You've got to give yourself patience and have grace and understanding that just because you want to do something differently and you've done it the new way 7 times, but you did the old thing 70,000 times,
Mhm.
you've still got to accumulate a lot of reps doing it the new way before that becomes your new default.
It's really interesting. Because when you read the Bible, they say the word patience in there, but when you read the Orthodox Bible, which is like the more original version, they don't have a word called patience. Their word is called long suffering. So it's really, really important to make that differentiation because people think like, well, you're either a patient person or you're not. No, some people can endure more suffering than other people. That's not a trait. That's like that is an active decision, and then it gets easier. I don't even like saying that word easier with time, but you're just have that ability to long suffer through things, which I think is incredible. Um, you talk about, I wanted to move into nutrition a little bit too, because I think this is important and you have a background in it. But in your book, you talk about, the vagal tone, HRV, and then how you tie it into just things that are really important for today. Like, how do we improve this? So first, what is vagal tone? How you realized and came to terms with like, gratitude, increasing empathy, those things help to increase that because um, this is really, really important. And that flows into high performance teams where you would think they're just a bunch of, can't even say ASS, bad, bad people like, high
Yeah.
performers. They're tough, they're
Mhm.
aggressive.
Mhm.
But one of the marks of high performing teams is that they have, and I don't like this word, but it is true, psychological safety. It's
Yeah.
not what people think, but
Yeah.
they have this space that they can operate, which allows them to take more risk. And so, can you
Mhm.
explain that? Just going from what is vagal tone
Yeah.
and then understanding how that plays a role in how we show up to be a true high performer, not what people think it is.
Yeah. So HRV is heart rate variability, and it's not the same thing as heart rate. Most of the people that I talk to have I don't want to say a difficult time, but it's important to differentiate the two. And so heart rate is the number of times that your heart beats in a given time frame, usually a minute. That's what we're familiar with. Heart rate variability refers to the fact that the heart is not a perfect metronome. There is a difference in time between the beats. And that's what we're measuring with heart rate variability. The variance is significantly impacted by the heart rate. So I always use the example of dribbling a basketball to help illustrate this, right? So if I dribble a basketball all the way up to my shoulder height, the rate slows down and the distance that it travels increases. Increased distance is going to be more opportunity for variance, right? If I dribble a basketball at knee height, the bounce rate per minute is going to increase. The distance it travels decreases, and therefore the opportunity for variance, different height per dribble, decreases as well. So that's a perfect correlation or analogy for heart rate and heart rate variability. The slower our heart beats, the more opportunity we have, more variance you can have between the beats. The faster the heart beats, the less space you have for variance between beats. So that's important to understand because heart rate variability is a measure of the amount of time that we spend in parasympathetic or sympathetic states. Most people are familiar with sympathetic, that's fight or flight, that's activation. Parasympathetic is the opposite. It's rest and digest, it's feed and breed, it's recovery. So it doesn't just impact performance, it basically dictates what you can and can't do on any given day. Um, I'll use the terms bandwidth or capacity interchangeably with resilience, emotional resilience, heart rate variability, and vagal tone. They're all basically speaking to the same thing. So we want higher heart rate variability or higher vagal tone because that leads to greater bandwidth, greater capacity, greater emotional resilience. If you want to stress test this, don't go to sleep tonight because sleep is the number one parasympathetic activity that we do in terms of duration or time. It's a parasympathetic activity. So more time in the parasympathetic state is going to increase your heart rate variability. Anybody that has gone for a night with no sleep, you know that your bandwidth, your capacity to deal with stuff the next day is non-existent, right? Or greatly diminished compared to what your baseline is. So it's critical to understand the need to and the importance of protecting our bandwidth, our stress tolerance, our resilience, both emotionally and physically, if we're going to be a high performer. And this is probably the number one thing that I work with on the folks that I work with personally. Last week, I was just in Nashville talking to first responders at a mental health and suicide prevention symposium. And this is a big part of being able to develop stress tolerance and resilience, is being able to protect your energy, your bandwidth, so that you can continue to show up for others. I mean, these are people that, and whether you're talking about SEALs or business leaders or firefighters, I mean, these are people that thrive on, I don't want to say chaos, but they're hard charging people, right? And they like to get after it. Um, the more we redline, the more we really have to learn how to find that sustainable pace, the one that will allow us to go and have longevity, right? And so I think there's a lot of science in there. So I'll stop now. Is there anything you want me to clarify before we keep going?
I think that basketball explanation was perfection. So just, I don't know if you made that up or, well, whoever, if that was you.
I think I made that up. I've never
If
heard
that
anybody
was
else
you,
say it, and
much respect to you for that
it's
one.
it's one of my slides. So
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else is using that one, but
No, that's really, really good.
I'll take it. So
Yes. Uh, and this really is so important because, when you talk about the vagus nerve, which I did an interview with Stephen Kotler, and,
mhm.
this is when like all this research was coming out. This was many years ago about vagus nerve, and now everyone's like so excited about the microbiome and like the gut. And, when you go into like ancient texts, and they say that the heart is the wellspring of your life, and like how the heart and the mind and the gut and how they all like flow into one another. I think it's really important for people to understand like what you eat feeds into your brain, touches your
Mhm.
heart, like all
Mhm.
these things are deeply connected. And
Mhm.
you touch on that a little bit, but how do you tie in? I want to hear your analogy for tying in
Yeah.
your gut into
Well,
this
so
in your heart.
quite literally, the gut-brain connection is the vagus nerve.
Yes.
Like that's it. Like it's not I think a lot of folks hear gut-brain connection and they're like, okay, well, they maybe think of that as like this woo-woo or esoteric kind of thing, but it's like, no, like you have nerves, and most nerves are either afferent or efferent, meaning they take information to or away from the brain. The vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve. And not only does it innervate every major visceral organ, so to your point about like all the things being connected, like every major visceral organ, and if you were to overlay the acupuncture points with the chakras, you would hit, they're all going to overlay with points of innervation of the vagus nerve. Probably not a coincidence. Um, but that gut brain connection is the vagus nerve. It is one of the only, if not the only nerve in the body that carries information in both directions. So when the brain talks to the gut, when the gut talks to the brain, that information is being transmitted via that 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve. So the fact that they speak to each other and communicate back and forth is not, it's not even a question. Like we know they do and we know how they do. As far as nutrition and everything else goes, like, your body is constantly sloughing off old cells and making new ones and regenerating. Each type of cell has a different cycle. You know, your skin cells turn over faster than your liver cells. But you know, every I forget all the numbers for all of them, but you know, in a month, your skin cells are different, right? That's why if you go to the beach on vacation and you get a tan, it fades over time, right? You know, your liver, your kidneys, all of those cells are constantly being regenerated. Well, the same way you can't build a house out of thin air, right? You need raw materials to build a house, right? Somebody is taking mud somewhere and turning those into bricks, and then they're sending the bricks somewhere, and a builder is making a wall out of bricks or whatever your house is made out of, wood and insulation and you know, drywall and bricks and siding, all of those things, all of those raw materials are being brought to the site and then stacked up. The raw materials for the cells in your body is the food that you eat. End of story. So if you're eating potato chips and McDonald's and donuts, that's the raw material for your cells. If you're eating high quality, for me, organic, pasture raised, wild caught food, those are the cells that, like, those are the raw materials that my cells are using to make me. So like I always go that way and then end it with you are what you eat, because if you start with you are what you eat, people have heard that and you go kind of deaf to it. But
Yeah.
like quite literally the choices you make around what you put in your body, number one, that's the raw material for your cells. Number two, if it's inflammatory in nature, you're creating inflammation and in your body, which is going to accelerate aging. It's going to decrease cognitive performance. It's going to lead to things like joint pain. You could have skin issues. Most autoimmune responses are food or diet related. Um, I call it kind of the corrective lenses phenomenon. Do you wear glasses or contacts?
No.
Okay. So if anybody listening wears glasses or contacts, the first time you go to the optometrist and you know they put the little thing in front of you and they test your vision and they're like, okay, they move the things and they're like, all right, is that better or worse? And you're like, holy shit, like I didn't know it could look like this, because you had just acclimated to your norm and you didn't know that there was something better. And as soon as you can see further or more clearly or whatever it is, you never want to go back
Mhm.
to life without your glasses or life without your contacts. And most people, when we make these dietary changes and they start to feel a certain way and you get rid of brain fog and you realize like, wow, my brain functions like this when I don't eat gluten or dairy or, you know, seed oils, or when I remove these inflammatory things, I don't have joint pain. I have better energy. I sleep better, all of these things. Oh, and by the way, when you're sleeping better and you don't have inflammation, your heart rate variability goes up. And now I've got more bandwidth and I can, it's, as you said, it's all interrelated. But once you start making those changes, everything functions better. And for me, it's like, well, it's the corrective lenses thing. Like, why would I choose to leave my house without contacts or glasses?
Then why do people like get into good habits? They can lose weight and then they just like backslide and they just put on all that weight. Explain that.
It's a great question. There's not a blanket statement that's
Mhm.
going to answer that for every single person. I think the closest you could get, or that I could get to a blanket statement is, um, maybe it's not a priority. Um, you never know what's going on in somebody's life that leads to that. But it could be a combination of stressors. It could be that, they've at one point prior in their life, they developed a coping mechanism that was centered around alcohol or food, and they haven't changed that default setting, right? As we talked about earlier, that they still use that as their coping mechanism. It could be a lack of knowledge. Maybe previously they were eating the right things, but they were starving themselves. They were cutting calories too much, or maybe again, it could be any number of things. That's a really challenging thing to answer with a blanket statement. Like you'd have to, like, that's an individual thing.
Yeah, I think one of the best answers for that I've heard is just how it relates to identity and how when you really have rewired yourself. So when we're talking throughout this podcast about change your default, this takes time. And sometimes
Mhm.
people they fall into good habits and they think like, oh, it's not a big deal. I'll just do this a little bit. But you're actually rewiring those bad connections and then they
Mhm.
can become stronger than the new ones. And so you just have to be very careful when you start a new program to make sure that you are like wiring it, all the things that have to change in your brain for longer
Mhm.
periods of time. And then just start associating a new person with your actions and behaviors so that you can, in my opinion, kill off that old version. That's what transforming is. Well, this was great. I think in terms of people just wanting, if they wanted to hear more from you, if people wanted to get in touch with you, like where can they go to connect with you? What added value can you bring to people that are looking to go to the next level? Because I know you have a lot of success in terms of, it's not book writing, that is your big thing, but you're just a high performance coach. You call yourself a human performance specialist, which I think is great. So where can people go to find more about you and what can they do
Yeah.
to connect with you?
Yeah, so I think as far as value and helping people, I think my superpower there is sort of helping people see the big picture, breaking it down into actionable steps, and building the habits, not shortcuts, but long-term sustainable habits that will help turn you into this relentlessly consistent, you know, unstoppable being. And that's the Move the Chains philosophy. And so website is ryanmunsey.com. You can get my book there. It's on Audible or Amazon as well. Um, and podcast is Move the Chains podcast.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, Sabrina. This has been a lot of fun.